The hidden truth of Earth's cataclysm, a pole shift, and the cyclical fate of humanity. Imagine a world not so different from our own, bustling cities, towering structures and civilizations that have reached their peak, brimming with knowledge and technological wonders. Now imagine that world wiped out in an instant, swallowed by the oceans, scorched by molten fire, and erased from memory, only to be rebuilt again by a few lucky survivors who start over from the ashes. What if this isn't a nightmare of science fiction, but a recurring reality? What if Earth's history is littered with the ruins of once great civilizations that have risen and fallen in a repeating cycle of destruction and rebirth? This is the chilling theory presented by Dr. Chan Thomas in his long-suppressed book, The Adam and Eve Story, a work that was hidden by the CIA for decades. Within its pages lies a vision of our planet's future that is as terrifying as it is compelling. A sudden and violent pole shift that will bring about the end of the world as we know it. Is this science fiction? Or is it the forgotten history of Earth's greatest secrets? Part 1. The Suppressed Manuscript. In the mid-1960s, Dr. Chan Thomas, an aerospace engineer with a penchant for unconventional ideas, published a book that would soon vanish from the public's reach. The Adam and Eve Story, a 284-page manuscript, wasn't just a provocative retelling of humanity's origins, but an ominous forecast of Earth's cyclical cataclysms, disasters that erase civilizations and reset humanity back to its primitive roots. The book suggested that Earth had been home to several advanced civilizations before ours, each obliterated by a planetary disaster. According to Thomas, these cataclysms occur with frightening regularity and are caused by sudden shifts in the planet's poles. Before the world had a chance to absorb these revelations, the book was classified by the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA. Only 57 pages of the manuscript were declassified decades later, and even those were heavily redacted. The public was left wondering, what could be so dangerous about a theory that linked ancient myths, geological evidence, and future catastrophe? What did the remaining 227 pages reveal? And why had the CIA deemed it necessary to hide this information for over 50 years? The answers may lie in what Dr. Thomas foresaw, a future event so catastrophic that it could bring an end to human civilization as we know it. Part 2. Cyclical Destruction. Dr. Chan Thomas proposed a controversial idea that the Earth's poles do not shift slowly, as we currently understand through the process of continental drift. Instead, Thomas argued that the poles could shift dramatically and suddenly in the span of hours, not millennia. When this happens, the continents themselves stop moving, but the planet's atmosphere and oceans do not, continuing their rotation at speeds of over 1,000 miles per hour. The result, according to Thomas, would be a global cataclysm that would wipe out nearly all life on Earth, leaving only a handful of survivors to rebuild society from the ground up. While this might sound like the plot of a disaster movie, Thomas's theory wasn't entirely without precedent. Nearly a decade earlier, a historian named Charles Hapgood had proposed a similar idea in his book, Earth's Shifting Crust. Hapgood's theory, which suggested that the Earth's outer shell could shift over its molten core, dragging continents along with it, was initially dismissed as pseudoscience. However, Hapgood gained a surprising ally in none other than Albert Einstein, who wrote the foreword to Hapgood's book, lending the theory an unexpected degree of credibility. Though Hapgood's theories about crustal displacement were never widely accepted, they resonated with Thomas, who believed that such shifts were not only possible, but had happened repeatedly throughout Earth's history. And while Hapgood had estimated that such shifts occurred over long periods of time, Thomas argued that they could happen almost instantaneously, turning the world upside down in less than a day. The stakes were clear. If Thomas's theory was correct, humanity was living on borrowed time. Part 3. The 6 Civilizations. One of the most compelling aspects of Thomas's theory is the idea that we are not the first advanced civilization to rise on Earth. In fact, according to Thomas, we are the 6th. He posited that there have been at least 5 previous civilizations, all of which reached heights of technology and culture comparable to our own, only to be wiped out by massive global cataclysms triggered by pole shifts. After each disaster, humanity was forced to start over, rebuilding from the Stone Age in a cycle of destruction and renewal that has repeated itself throughout history. Thomas pointed to ancient legends and myths from around the world as evidence of these previous civilizations. Nearly every culture has a story about a great flood that wiped out the world and allowed humanity to start anew. In the Bible, Noah is tasked with building an ark to survive a deluge sent by God. In Hindu mythology, Manu is warned by the god Vishnu to build a boat and save his family from a similar flood. The ancient Sumerians tell the story of a great flood in the Epic of Gilgamesh, while the Maya, Hawaiians, and Native Americans all have their own versions of a flood myth. Even the Greeks spoke of a flood that destroyed the world, known as the Deucalion's flood. Thomas argued that these stories are not just myths, but memories of real events, cataclysms that destroyed previous civilizations and reset the clock on human progress. While mainstream archaeology tells us that the first advanced civilization emerged in Mesopotamia around 6,500 years ago, Thomas believed that this was only the latest in a long line of human societies, each of which had been wiped out in turn. The evidence, Thomas said, was all around us. The Peary Race Map, a 16th century document that appears to show the coastline of Antarctica, is just one example. Antarctica wasn't officially discovered until 1820, and it has been covered in ice for millions of years, so how could a map from the 1500s depict its coast without ice? Thomas believed that the map was a remnant from a long-lost civilization that existed before the last pole shift, when Antarctica was free of ice. Hapgood had also suggested that the Earth's poles had shifted dramatically in the past, causing the planet's climate to change rapidly and triggering floods, volcanic eruptions, and mass extinctions. But where Hapgood placed the last pole shift around 11,600 years ago, Thomas argued that the most recent cataclysm occurred just 6,500 years ago, right around the time that the first civilizations in Mesopotamia were emerging. Part 4. Signs of the coming shift. If Dr. Thomas's theory is correct, then the next pole shift is not a distant threat, but a looming disaster that could occur at any moment. And according to Thomas, there are already signs that it may have begun. For one, there is the growing evidence of climate instability. While mainstream scientists attribute this to human-induced climate change, Thomas believed that it was the result of larger forces at work, forces linked to the shifting of the Earth's poles. He pointed to historical records of abrupt climate shifts, such as the Younger Dryas, a period of sudden cooling that occurred around 11,600 years ago, as evidence that the planet's climate can change dramatically in a short period of time. Then there are the geological records, which show that the Earth has experienced periods of intense volcanic activity and mass extinctions at regular intervals throughout its history. Some scientists believe that these events were caused by asteroid impacts or massive volcanic eruptions, but Thomas argued that they were the result of pole shifts, which triggered earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanic eruptions on a global scale. Even more troubling are the increasing reports of magnetic anomalies. The Earth's magnetic field, which protects us from harmful solar radiation, has been weakening in recent years, and the magnetic poles themselves are shifting. In the early 1990s, the North Pole was drifting at a rate of about 9 meters per year, but that rate has increased dramatically in the past few decades. Today, the North Pole is moving at nearly 40 meters per year, a sign that something is happening beneath the Earth's surface. Thomas believed that these magnetic shifts were a precursor to a full-blown pole shift, which could happen at any time. How does the cataclysm unfold? Before we tell you, are you enjoying this video? Like, subscribe, and get notified for more spine-chilling mysteries. Part 5. The Cataclysm Awakening. The day the poles shift, Thomas said, would begin like any other. The sun would rise. People would go about their daily lives, unaware that the planet's balance was about to be violently disrupted. But as the day progressed, strange things would start to happen. The sky might take on a strange hue, the wind might pick up suddenly, and the ground might start to tremble. And then, without warning, the real disaster would strike. The Earth's crust, which had been held in place by the planet's magnetic field, would suddenly slip. The continents would stop moving, but the oceans and atmosphere would continue to rotate at their usual speed, over 1,000 miles per hour. The result would be chaos on an unimaginable scale. Tsunamis would rise up from the oceans, towering over cities like New York, Los Angeles, and Tokyo, sweeping away everything in their path. The winds would tear across the land at supersonic speeds, leveling forests and flattening buildings. In some places, the ground would crack open, spewing molten lava into the air and setting entire regions ablaze. The destruction would be far worse than any natural disaster humanity has ever faced. In less than a day, entire continents would be transformed. The Pacific Ocean, surging from its depths, would cover the west coast of the United States, turning Los Angeles and San Francisco into nothing more than submerged ruins. The Atlantic Ocean would race across the East Coast, swallowing New York, Boston, and Washington, D.C., leaving behind only mud, debris, and silence. Those unfortunate enough to survive the initial destruction would find themselves in a world unrecognizable from the one they had known. The Earth's rotation would slow, causing the sun to hang in the sky for much longer than usual. One half of the planet would be scorched by unrelenting heat, while the other half would freeze in a new and deadly ice age. As the atmosphere struggled to regain its balance, hurricanes and tornadoes of unimaginable size would sweep across the globe, leaving no place safe. Imagine being in a car traveling at 1,000 miles per hour, and then suddenly, without warning, the car comes to a complete stop. You would be thrown forward with such force that survival would seem impossible. Now apply that scenario to an entire city or an entire continent. Skyscrapers would collapse, millions of people would be tossed like rag dolls, and the very ground beneath them would rip apart. This is the world that Dr. Thomas described in his grim vision of the pole shift. But as horrifying as this vision is, it is only the beginning. After the initial destruction, the survivors would face an even greater challenge: rebuilding in a world where nothing is as it once was. The seas would have risen dramatically, covering much of the land that once supported life. The Earth's climate, now wildly unpredictable, would make farming and other essential activities nearly impossible. The survivors would be forced to live off whatever resources they could scavenge, eking out a meager existence in a harsh and unforgiving environment. Thomas believed that only a small fraction of humanity would survive this catastrophe, perhaps as few as 1 in every 1,000 people. And those who did survive would be thrust back into a new Stone Age, with no technology, no infrastructure, and no knowledge of the advanced world they had left behind. Part 6. The Evidence for Past Cataclysms. As shocking as Dr. Thomas's vision of the future may be, he claimed that it had already happened before, many times. In his book, Thomas presented evidence that previous civilizations, just as advanced as ours, had been wiped out by similar pole shifts. The clues, he argued, are hidden in plain sight, if only we know where to look. One of the most intriguing pieces of evidence comes from the ancient Piri race map. Created in 1513, this map shows the coastlines of South America, Europe, and Africa with incredible accuracy. But what makes the map truly remarkable is that it also shows Antarctica, a continent that wasn't officially discovered until 1820. Even more puzzling, the map depicts Antarctica's coastline without the thick ice sheet that covers it today. How could a map drawn in the 16th century show details of a continent that was still buried under miles of ice? Thomas believed that the Piri race map was based on much older maps, drawn by an advanced civilization that existed long before our recorded history. This civilization, Thomas argued, was destroyed in a previous pole shift, and their knowledge was passed down through the ages, eventually finding its way into the Piri race map. Thomas also pointed to other ancient structures as evidence of lost civilizations. The Great Sphinx of Giza, for example, shows signs of erosion that some geologists believe could only have been caused by water, yet Egypt has not seen such flooding in thousands of years. If this erosion was indeed caused by water, it would suggest that the Sphinx was built long before the time of the ancient Egyptians, possibly during a period when the Earth's climate was radically different. Then there are the legends of Atlantis and Mu, two lost continents that were said to have been home to advanced civilizations before being destroyed in cataclysms. While mainstream historians dismiss these stories as myth, Thomas believed they were based on real events. He argued that Atlantis and Mu were just two examples of civilizations that had been wiped out by previous pole shifts, their knowledge and achievements lost to history. The recurring theme in all of these stories is water, massive floods that wiped out entire civilizations. Nearly every ancient culture has a flood myth, from the story of Noah's Ark in the Bible to the Epic of Gilgamesh in Sumerian literature. Even the Maya, Hawaiians, and Native Americans have their own versions of the Great Flood. Thomas believed that these myths were not mere folklore but historical accounts of past pole shifts and the destruction they caused. What do you think? Tell us in the comments section. Thank you so much for watching. We greatly appreciate you. Part 7. The Science of the Pole Shift. But how could such a cataclysmic event happen? According to Dr. Thomas, the key lies deep within the Earth itself. In the Adam and Eve story, he explained that the Earth's crust is not a fixed shell, but is capable of moving independently of the planet's molten core. This crust, Thomas claimed, is held in place by the Earth's magnetic field, which creates stability. However, every few thousand years, the magnetic and electrical order of the planet becomes disrupted. When this happens, the crust can slide over the molten layers beneath it, causing the continents to shift dramatically. The most terrifying aspect of Thomas's theory is the speed with which these changes occur. He claimed that once the crust begins to move, the process is rapid, taking place in just a matter of hours. In that short time, entire landmasses would be displaced, oceans would rise, and the world as we know it would be torn apart. Modern science has provided some evidence to support the idea of pole shifts. We know, for example, that the Earth's magnetic field has flipped many times throughout its history, with the North and South poles reversing their positions. These magnetic reversals are recorded in the rock formations on the ocean floor, where lava flows capture the direction of the Earth's magnetic field as they cool. According to geological records, the poles have flipped hundreds of times over the past 4.5 billion years. While these magnetic reversals are usually thought to occur over thousands or even millions of years, some scientists believe they can happen much more quickly. In fact, recent studies suggest that the Earth's magnetic field has weakened significantly over the past few centuries, and the magnetic poles are drifting faster than ever before. Could this be the prelude to a full-blown pole shift? Thomas believed that the magnetic reversal of the poles was just one part of a larger process. He argued that when the magnetic field becomes disorganized, it allows the Earth's crust to move freely, triggering the kind of global cataclysm he described. And while modern scientists may not agree with all of Thomas's conclusions, they do acknowledge that the Earth's magnetic field is changing, and that we are overdue for another reversal. Part 8. Preparing for the inevitable. If Dr. Thomas was right and a pole shift is inevitable, what can be done to prepare? Unfortunately, the answer is not much. While some survivalists may stockpile food, water, and other supplies in the hope of riding out the disaster, the scale of destruction Thomas described would be difficult, if not impossible, to survive. In the aftermath of a pole shift, the world would be a very different place. Entire continents would be submerged, the climate would be radically altered, and the infrastructure that supports modern life, electricity, transportation, communication, would be wiped out. Even those who managed to survive the initial disaster would face a long and difficult struggle to rebuild. For those who do survive, the future may look more like the past. Without the technology and resources we currently rely on, humanity would be forced to start over, just as it has done after previous cataclysms. In the ruins of our once great cities, the survivors would have to rely on ancient skills, hunting, farming, and building from scratch, in order to survive. Some may see Thomas's vision of the future as bleak, but he believed that it was part of a natural cycle. Just as previous civilizations had risen and fallen, so too would our own. And in time, humanity would rise again, building new cities, discovering new technologies, and perhaps even uncovering the ruins of our own lost world. Part 9. A final warning. As we stand on the brink of a new century, with advances in technology and science transforming our world, it's easy to forget how fragile our civilization truly is. The Adam and Eve story serves as a stark reminder that the forces of nature are far greater than any human invention. The Earth has seen countless civilizations rise and fall, each one convinced of its own permanence, until the ground shifted beneath their feet. In the decades since Thomas's book was first published, many of his predictions have gained scientific credibility. We now know that the Earth's magnetic field is weakening, and that the poles are drifting at an accelerating rate. We know that the climate is changing, and that extreme weather events are becoming more frequent and more destructive. We know that ancient civilizations such as the Mayans and the Egyptians rose and fell in ways we are only just beginning to understand. But the greatest mystery of all may be whether we are living in the final days before the next great cataclysm. Will the pole shift occur in our lifetime? Or will it be centuries before the Earth's crust slides again? No one can say for certain, but if history is any guide, the only thing we can be sure of is that the shift will happen, and when it does, it will change the world forever. In the meantime, we can only watch and wait, hoping to be among the survivors when the next part of human history begins.